Saturday morning, time for the Experts program here on Power Talk Radio, 1460 AM, 101.1 FM. And Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, is joining us right now. Luis, good morning to you, or good day, I should say.
Good morning. Good morning to you, my friend.
So we have a really fascinating story that's right topical to what's going on right now. It's out of Wired magazine. We're going to talk about technology and the war with Iran. And from Ukraine to Iran, hacking security cameras is now part of the war playbook. Wow. I mean, this is what we're seeing now in real time, and we've seen this with previous conflicts, but here we are in the age of 5G and broadband internet that we did not have, 25, 26 years ago with the first war in the Middle East that we did with Iraq. But boy, the way the internet and internet speeds have advanced and the technologies in the last 3 decades all being applied on and off the battlefield right now, and some really fascinating things are going on with these technologies. So let's talk about the hacking of security cameras. Who's hacking the cameras? Whose cameras do they belong to? What's it doing?
So there's a couple of companies, Chinese companies called Hikvision and Dahua, and they make security cameras that are ubiquitous. They probably are like 70% of the security domed cameras that you see in stores or casinos or anywhere that you go.
So these are those black glass cameras with like the white metal housing around them, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and you see them everywhere. And Hikvision and Dahua have been the dominant producer of these cameras, but they also have a lot of vulnerabilities that are relatively easy to exploit if you're not patching the software of the cameras or the firmware, which most people don't bother doing. And the Iranians have now started targeting all of these cameras, which are prolific throughout the Middle East and parts of Europe and even in the United States, although the U.S. government banned the sale of Hikvision and Dahua about 5 years ago because they were concerned that the Chinese government somehow exploit these companies to spy on American military bases as well as other facilities. But regardless, these vulnerabilities have allowed the Iranian hackers to tap into these cameras and use these cameras for using to target their drones based on what the cameras are seeing. Because they don't have the satellite systems that the United States has or the other surveillance systems that allow them to pick targets of opportunity, they basically found a backdoor way of doing this by hacking into these cameras and using them as ways to set targets for their drones, which right now they're bombing all sorts of stuff all over the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things about this, we talk about asymmetrical warfare, and this is a perfect example of asymmetrical warfare where, because they don't have this billion-dollar satellite surveillance system that we have, they're doing the next best thing. And I guess with a lot of these types of cameras, they're on insecure internet connections, right? They might be on the internet, but they're not behind a VPN. There's not multi-factor authorization to get into them. They're kind of on open internet because I guess probably the people who hooked them up and who made them, they would never imagine that they would be used in a nefarious way.
Yeah, and some of these systems have been out there for almost a decade. So back before any of this was even a twinkle in anybody's eye of a possibility. And like I said, a lot of the vulnerabilities that these cameras have and the network recorders that they use, they're not being patched because people just don't think of them. You think about patching your computer, maybe patching your servers, but you rarely think about patching your video surveillance system. But for our clients, it's one of the things that we monitor. We do internal vulnerability scans on a weekly basis and have detected all these vulnerabilities that we then subsequently patched because CISA, which is the agency in the United States that manages information security, they have identified these vulnerabilities and they've notified people of them. But unless you're paying attention, you don't even know that they're there.
How do the Iranians or anybody find out what the IP addresses are of these cameras? When, I mean, you've got so many things out there on the internet. What's the telltale that gives it away that says, oh, this is a surveillance camera. Let's see what it's doing. What's it looking at?
Yeah, well, it uses a very specific protocol to communicate, to send video signals. And that's what they do is using AI now, it's much faster than it used to be in the old days, but they can go out and have an AI bot check for that particular open port that these cameras use to communicate on the internet on firewalls. And if it finds them, then it starts to see if it can penetrate that signal by using one of these vulnerabilities that are, known vulnerabilities, and then take control of that camera or the image that camera is sending out, because they don't necessarily need to control the camera. All they want to do is see what the camera sees. And once they get into those systems, they're able to tap into those network video recorders and just watch what the cameras are transmitting.
Right. And so then that way, all they have to do is figure out, hey, what's the hours hours, minutes, and seconds, latitude and longitude of this particular camera, and there you go. Target the bomb that way.
That's what they're doing. And Ukraine discovered how to do this at the start of their war because, they, much like the Iranians, are facing a bigger foe in Russia. And so they had to adapt quickly. And just like they started using commercial drones to destroy $1 million or $100 million tanks that the Russians were throwing at them, the Iranians are using their $50,000 drones to destroy $1 million pieces of American equipment. So It's what nations do when they're trying to survive a larger foe.
And you mentioned the fact that they've identified locations of these cameras. They send the drones out there and can send bombs behind them. So this is what cameras that are in neighboring Gulf states that the Iranians want to cause problems with because of maybe those states' support of the United States. So we're talking about countries like Qatar and Dubai and Saudi Arabia and so forth. Is there any move now that this is like out in the open and we know how they're doing it? Is there a move going on to, hey, wait a minute, let's see if we can secure these things. Let's put them behind firewalls. Let's use multi-factor authorization or anything else that we have to do to shut off access to these cameras.
Well, it's easy to do for government agencies, right? Because you can send out an edict and say, hey, turn these cameras off or check for the vulnerability and patch it if it needs to be. Where you have a challenge is commercial enterprises that basically don't have anybody managing these systems. You can't tell them to turn them off. Most of these surveillance cameras have a legitimate security use.
Right.
And so the owners want to keep them running. The question is, how do you balance the needs of security versus the needs of people using these cameras for everyday use?
Right.
And it's up to, I think, education. You got to make sure that you have people that know what they're doing and know how to patch these systems or replace those systems with cameras that are much more secure, which is a longer term issue.
And that may be how they ended up with the drone that helped to fire the missile that hit the hotel in Dubai.
Yeah,
Is using that. And I was reading about this online, and what's interesting is, do you remember the QE2?
Oh, yeah.
So the QE2, the old ocean liner, Queen Elizabeth II, which was retired in 2008, is in Dubai, and it is a hotel ship, hotel museum ship like the Rotterdam in Rotterdam and the Queen Mary in Long Beach. And there has been real legitimate concern by the operators of the QE2 that the ship will be targeted by the Iranians during this war because it will be full of tourists from the Middle East and from America and Northern Europe. And of course, they can't move it. The engines don't work anymore. Yeah. It's permanently moored in place. And even if they decided to put a tugboat on it and pull it out of there, it's only going to be moving at about 3 to 5 knots. So it's still a gigantic 70,000 ton target. So that's something that I was reading about as a real concern over there. And then the other thing that you mentioned to us was that right now supplies of nitrogen-based fertilizers are not happening because the vast majority of the world's supply of nitrogen-based fertilizers comes out of Qatar, of all places.
Yep, which is going to impact agriculture around the world, including the United States, at a time when farmers are just getting ready to plant the next crops, especially in the Midwest, where they use a lot of these nitrogen-based fertilizers. If they run out of existing stockpiles, replacements are going to be harder to find and way more expensive. So the cost of the war may bleed into our food supply as well.
Yeah, there are all sorts of unintended things happen when wars happen, and you kind of learn downstream where all those externalities are, and it's kind of surprising what those externalities are.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially when you have a war like this where it's a lot of asymmetric, as you pointed out, activities are going on. The Iranians destroyed a couple of data centers in the UAE and Bahrain, and I suspect that they're going to start looking for a lot more of these soft targets to inflict indirect pain to the world at large.
All right, that's Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, joining us today on Power Talk Radio. Online, you'll find them at alvareztg.com. At AlvarezTG is the X handle. Luis, the toll-free number for the I-Team.
Give us a call at 866-78-I-TEAM. That's 866-784-8326.
All right, and looking ahead to Monday, what's on the agenda?
Well, if you've been wanting to get a solar system but didn't want to pay a lot of money for it, tune in and you might have an alternative that might work for at least offsetting some of your costs.
That's right, supplemental solar. We're going to talk about that Monday starting at 8:30 in the morning here on Power Talk Radio. Luis, thank you so much. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will chat again on Monday.
Take care, my friend.